Chosen ones, you are not supposed to be here. Not in this moment, not in this chamber, not under the blinding glare of those who have spent lifetimes moving unseen. Yet here you are, and the world feels it. The room was meant for whispers, for carefully measured sentences and politically precise pauses, but the second your name was spoken, everything fractured. They didn't even look at you at first. It was the absence that spoke louder, the refusal to breathe in your direction, the trembling in their hands hidden under neatly folded papers. The president's lips moved only enough to form a sigh before they sealed shut entirely, as if sound itself was dangerous now. Across the long table, members of the Global Council shifted uncomfortably, their eyes tracing invisible lines in the air, avoiding the point where you sat. The air was heavier than truth. Even the translators, usually unshaken, froze mid-sentence, their fingers hovering above keyboards, waiting for words that would never come. A single cough echoed through the hall, and it felt staged, an attempt to cut the tension that had now crystallized into something unbreakable. Outside these reinforced walls, the city continued unaware. Cars moved, markets buzzed, the world spun. But here, in this sealed chamber, the concept of time bent. It was as if the moment had detached from the hour, the minute, the day, creating its own reality where only this silence existed. What you carry is not information. It is not simply a name or a story. It is weight, the kind that shifts the balance of nations and shatters decades-old alliances. They knew this day would come, but none expected it to feel like this. The president's gaze finally lifted, meeting yours. There was no hostility, no fear, just the acknowledgement of inevitability. His hands, once clasped firmly together, loosened on the table. He leaned back in his chair as though surrendering not to you, but to what your presence represented. And in that surrender, something unseen moved through the room. An unspoken recognition that the silence was no longer theirs to control. Then, somewhere in the shadows of that chamber, a sound began. Not a voice, not yet, but something that would change everything. The moment you stepped beyond the chamber doors, the air shifted. Hallways lined with portraits of leaders past seemed to watch you. Yet the living figures in the corridor could not bear to meet your gaze. Suits brushed past in a rush, pretending to be late for meetings that didn't exist, clutching folders tighter, as if the paper inside could shield them from whatever they feared you carried. A diplomat's pen snapped in his hand as you passed, the ink bleeding into his palm. He didn't look at you, didn't even flinch, just turned sharply and vanished into a stairwell without a word. The sound of your steps echoed, not loud, but enough to fill every corner with the reminder that you were still here. The glass walls of the council's upper floors reflected fragments of your face, distorted, doubled, stretched, as though the building itself was trying to avoid giving you a clear reflection. Somewhere ahead, a door shut with deliberate slowness, the kind of closing that wasn't meant to keep you out, but to stop anyone inside from being caught looking at you. You reached the intersection where 4 hallways met. Guards stood at each corner, their eyes fixed on invisible points ahead, bodies rigid, as if they'd been instructed not to acknowledge you under any circumstance. The air between you and them was thick, and for a moment it felt like an invisible barrier kept their stares locked away. In a side corridor, a woman in a deep navy dress stopped mid-stride when she saw you. Her eyes flickered. Recognition, disbelief, maybe fear. And then she looked down so sharply it was almost unnatural. Without another glance, she adjusted her pace and moved on, her heels striking the marble in a rhythm that didn't belong to someone calm. It wasn't just avoidance, it was something heavier. These people weren't acting out of personal dislike or suspicion. It was as if acknowledging your existence would tether them to something they weren't prepared to face. Somewhere above, muffled voices murmured behind glass, words that could not be heard but felt. The shadows in the hall seemed to stretch toward you, bending slightly, as though the building itself wanted to know what the others dared not ask. The room smelled faintly of aged paper and cold metal. A long oak table dominated the center, its surface covered in bound ledgers, their leather cracked from years of handling. You noticed one, larger than the rest, set apart as if no one dared to stack anything atop it. The gold embossing on the cover had faded, leaving only faint grooves where the letters once shone. You pulled the chair back, the scrape against the marble loud in the stillness. The ledger opened reluctantly, its spine creaking, as though it knew you were not just flipping pages, but trespassing. Inside, the ink was precise, the handwriting almost mechanical, each line a record of decisions, treaties, and names long forgotten by the public. But then you saw it. A single page with no words, no numbers, nothing but an uneven texture that hinted something had been there once. You ran your fingers across it, feeling faint ridges, like scars left after something had been deliberately removed. Under the light, faint outlines appeared, but not enough to form letters. It was as if the page itself refused to reveal its truth. One of the council clerks appeared at the doorway, her frame still, her face unreadable. She didn't speak, didn't move closer, just lingered there, her presence alone carrying a warning. You could sense she knew exactly which page you had found, but her eyes flickered with something deeper, a burden she carried yet could never name aloud. You thought of how Yeshua once spoke in parables, revealing truth to those ready to see, while concealing it from those who would twist it. This page felt the same, the meaning hidden in plain sight, waiting for the one who could bear its weight. A thin beam of light cut across the table as the clouds shifted outside, illuminating the empty page for a heartbeat. In that moment, you caught the faintest image, like a watermark. A crest you didn't recognize, crowned by an unfamiliar symbol. Then, the light moved, and it vanished. The clerk stepped back into the shadows, leaving the doorway empty. Somewhere beyond the walls, a bell began to toll. Slow, deliberate, each chime echoing through the silence as if counting down to something only the council understood. The council chamber was empty now, but the upper glass booths still carried the faint hum of equipment left running. You ascended the narrow staircase at the side, each step hollow beneath your weight. The booth doors were heavy, soundproofed, built to hold the whispers of history before they reached the ears of the world. Inside, the air was cool, touched with the metallic scent of microphones and aging headsets. Rows of switches and dials blinked faintly in standby, yet a faint static crackle filled the room. Stacks of notes lay scattered across the desk, written in multiple languages. Some you recognized instantly, others that felt older than the building itself. You picked one up at random. The handwriting was hurried, almost frantic, as if whoever wrote it didn't have the luxury of finishing their sentences. Certain words had been underlined again and again. their meaning lost without the context that seemed intentionally removed. Across the margin was a symbol, a small cross drawn hastily in black ink, almost hidden beneath the scrawl. You sat, slipping the headset on. At first, there was only the hiss of static. Then, faintly, a voice emerged. Low, urgent, speaking in a tongue you couldn't fully place. It wasn't the official translation feed. It was something beneath it, layered like a shadow behind the spoken words. You adjusted the dial, and the voice became clearer. It spoke of corridors beneath the council building, of meetings unrecorded, of names erased from official memory. Then it paused, as if aware of being overheard, and whispered something in a language you did understand. The words chilled you, not because of their meaning, but because they were meant for you. A movement caught your eye through the glass. In the empty chamber below, a figure stood at the center, head tilted upward, watching you. The light from above didn't touch their face, leaving only the outline of their frame. They didn't move, didn't speak, just remained there as if waiting for a signal you didn't know you had to give. The headset suddenly cut to silence. All the blinking lights on the console went dark at once. When you looked down again, the chamber floor was empty, and yet the chair beside you, the one you hadn't touched, was now turned to face you. The archives were buried beneath 3 levels of reinforced stone, sealed by a door that looked older than the council itself. Its surface was carved with patterns so intricate they seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. 2 guards stood at either side, motionless, their eyes fixed on the far wall. Without a word, they stepped aside as you approached, as though some unspoken authority had already cleared your path. Inside, the air was dense with the scent of parchment and dust. Shelves stretched endlessly in both directions, filled with scrolls bound in faded ribbon, books wrapped in cloth, and brittle papers sealed with ancient wax. There was no hum of modern machinery here, only the soft rustle of history breathing. You traced the spines until your hand stopped on a volume thicker than your arm. Its leather was cracked but warm, as though it had been waiting for your touch. When you opened it, the script inside was not like the modern records above. The letters curled in shapes that carried weight beyond language. You could feel it. This was not just law, but covenant. Halfway through, you found it. A decree written centuries ago, forbidding certain knowledge from being shared beyond a chosen few. The words spoke of a name, one that would appear when nations aligned against their own people. It described the silence that would follow, the sealing of lips by those sworn to protect truth, but bound instead to conceal it. In the margin, a line stood out, written in a different hand, perhaps by a later keeper of these records. As he said, the truth will set you free, but only if you dare to hear it. The letters were faint, yet the reference was unmistakable. Yeshua's words, carried through time, hidden in the place where even rulers feared to look. You read on, but the next section was missing. The parchment neatly cut out, the edges too clean to be the work of time. Whatever had been there was gone, perhaps locked away in another chamber deeper still. Somewhere far above, you heard the faint sound of footsteps, too distant to belong to anyone in the archives. You closed the book, the echo of its weight settling like a warning. From the shadows between the shelves, something shifted. Not a person, but the suggestion of movement, watching you from where the light could not reach. The reception hall was a display of elegance meant to distract from the gravity of the conversations that took place within it. Chandeliers hung like frozen constellations above polished marble, casting light that seemed almost too bright, too deliberate. Clusters of diplomats spoke in hushed tones near the edges, their eyes flicking toward you only in brief, stolen moments. You noticed him immediately. The ambassador from a nation that had remained silent for decades, neither ally nor enemy, existing in the shadow between. He stood alone near the center of the room, unmoving, a glass of untouched wine in his hand. His suit was immaculate, his posture perfect, yet there was something unnatural about his stillness, as if he had been placed there like a statue. You walked toward him, the sound of your steps drawing glances from the others. The closer you came, the more you realized his gaze was fixed not on you, but on a point far beyond, as though he was listening to something no one else could hear. When you stopped before him, he finally blinked, the smallest acknowledgement that you existed. He didn't speak at first, but when he did, his voice was low, almost reluctant. "They've been waiting for you longer than you can imagine," he said. "Longer than I have been alive." You asked who they were, but he didn't answer. His fingers tightened around the glass, though it didn't tremble. He looked past you, toward the doorway where council aides moved like shadows, never lingering long enough to be noticed. "You think they fear what you know," he continued, "but they fear what you are. Knowledge can be hidden. A person cannot." His eyes shifted then, locking onto yours with an intensity that cut through the room's quiet noise. For a brief second, it felt like the entire hall was holding its breath. And then, as quickly as the moment came, he looked away. The stillness returned. His words stopped, as though an unseen hand had closed them off. A string quartet began to play from the far corner, the soft notes filling the space between you. When you turned to glance toward the sound, it was only for a moment. But when you looked back, the ambassador was gone. Only the untouched glass of wine remained on the table beside you, the surface still rippling faintly, as though someone had just let it go. Night had fallen by the time you reached the communications wing. The windows overlooked the city, but the glass reflected only the dim interior lights, turning the view into a dark mirror. Rows of consoles lined the walls, each one glowing faintly with incoming transmissions. The air hummed with the faint pulse of encrypted signals passing invisibly through the room. A lone operator sat at the far end, her back to you, her headset tilted slightly forward, as if she were leaning toward a voice no one else could hear. Her fingers moved over the controls with slow precision, adjusting dials by fractions, stopping occasionally to write in a small leather-bound logbook. She didn't turn when you approached. Instead, she held up a hand, a signal for silence, and slid one of the headsets toward you. You hesitated before putting it on. At first, there was only static, then faint fragments of speech in languages shifting too quickly to follow. Words blurred into one another, distorted as though crossing vast distances. Then the signal stabilized, and a single voice emerged, low but steady, speaking in an ancient dialect you recognized only because of a phrase you had once read in scripture. It was the same promise Yeshua had spoken, that a voice would go out into all the earth, carrying truth to every corner, and nothing could silence it. Here it was, carried through encrypted waves, slipping past borders and barriers. The operator scribbled something in her log and tilted her head toward you, mouthing without sound, "It's for you." The voice spoke of a gathering, not in one place, but across continents, where those who had been silent for years would begin to speak in unison. It described messages hidden in the patterns of radio interference, in the flicker of distant satellites, in the pauses between transmissions no one bothered to record. As the voice faded, another began, distant but growing clearer, speaking in a tone so urgent you leaned forward instinctively. The final words reached you just before the line went dead. The operator removed her headset and shut off the console without explanation. She didn't look at you as she stood, but as she walked away, her hand brushed lightly against your shoulder, a silent passing of something unseen. The chamber was colder than the rest of the building, the walls lined with metal cabinets sealed by coded locks. A single desk sat in the center, its surface illuminated by a narrow beam of light from the fixture above. On it lay a single folder, unmarked, as though daring you to touch it. You opened it and found sheets covered in strings of letters and numbers, arranged without pattern to the untrained eye. But, as you stared, a rhythm began to emerge, subtle and deliberate, like a voice speaking through the static of the page. You recognized certain fragments, coordinates, dates, names, but they were scattered, buried in the code like seeds beneath winter soil. A small brass device rested beside the papers, its face covered with shifting rings etched with symbols older than the languages you knew. You turned it slowly, watching the patterns align until the first sentence emerged. It was a message, but not one meant for public record. It spoke of a meeting held in complete darkness, where no one's face could be seen, and no word was spoken aloud. Instead, each person wrote a single line on parchment, passing it forward without looking. The lines formed a prophecy of events that would begin with silence and end with a voice the world could not stop hearing. You continued decoding, the rings turning with a satisfying click at each alignment. Halfway through, a phrase emerged that froze your hands, a reference to a man who once said, "Let those who have ears hear." The connection was clear, the same truth carried across centuries, wrapped now in numbers and hidden from the unready. The last portion of the message resisted translation, the code shifting even as you worked. Then, suddenly, the lights in the room dimmed, and the locks on the cabinets clicked open in unison. The sound echoed through the empty chamber, a chorus of steel giving way. Before you could move, a shadow crossed the beam of light on the desk. Someone was standing just out of sight, their presence announced only by the faint shift of air. You turned toward the movement, but the room beyond the light was too deep, too black to see into. From within that darkness, you heard the sound of the cipher rings turning again, though your hands were no longer on them. The council's grand hall had been prepared for an announcement. Rows of cameras stood ready, their red standby lights glowing like watchful eyes. Reporters filled the space, their murmurs blending into a low, restless hum. At the front, the podium stood beneath the towering emblem of the council, a great seal cast in bronze, its weight a symbol of authority. You stepped inside quietly, unnoticed at first. But then you saw it. The seal above the podium was gone. The space where it had hung was bare, a faint outline left on the wall like the shadow of something removed in haste. The absence was louder than the noise of the room. An aide hurried past you, his face pale, avoiding your gaze as he muttered orders into a headset. "Cover it," you heard him say, though there was nothing to cover. Council members began filing in, their expressions carefully composed, yet edged with unease. You could feel the change in the air, the tension that came when a symbol meant to stand for centuries vanished overnight. They didn't look toward the empty space. No one did. You moved closer to the podium. Papers lay neatly stacked, awaiting the speech that was meant to be delivered here. The first page had been replaced by a blank sheet. No words, no seal, just emptiness. It was deliberate, as though whatever message was intended had been swallowed before it could be spoken. A faint memory stirred, something you had read long ago, about a time when Yeshua said, "If these were silent, the stones would cry out." The absence of the seal felt the same. Even stripped from the wall, it was still speaking, perhaps louder than before. The murmurs in the room quieted suddenly. A door at the side opened, and a senior council figure stepped forward. He approached the podium, placed his hands on either side, and looked over the crowd. For a long moment, he said nothing. His gaze flickered toward you briefly, recognition without greeting, then back to the blank page before him. Without a word, he stepped away, leaving the podium untouched. The cameras clicked in rapid bursts, freezing the moment into images the public would see but never understand. Somewhere above, a faint, metallic sound echoed, as if something heavy had been dragged across stone. It came from beyond the ceiling where no one was supposed to be. The council tower's clock had always been precise, its chimes echoing through the city with mechanical certainty. Tonight, it was silent. You noticed first from the absence of sound, the expected toll that never came. Looking up, you saw the hands fixed at 3 minutes past 12, unmoving against the moonlit sky. Inside the clock chamber, the air was thick with the scent of oil and dust. Gears larger than doors stood still, their polished teeth glinting faintly in the dim light. The steady hum of machinery was gone, replaced by a silence so complete it pressed against your ears. A single lamp illuminated the workbench at the far side of the room. Tools lay scattered in deliberate disarray, as if whoever had been here left in a hurry. In the center sat a small, ornate box, unlocked but unopened. The wood was dark and smooth, inlaid with silver lines that curved into shapes you couldn't quite identify. You reached for it, but before your fingers touched the lid, a faint ticking began. Not from the clock, it was too far away, but from inside the box itself. Each tick was slow, deliberate, as though counting something other than time. Beyond the tall glass windows, the city lay motionless, the traffic below unusually sparse. You felt it then. This was not just a mechanical failure. Something had chosen this moment to hold time in place. You remembered stories of a moment in history when a day stood still, recorded not in official accounts, but in whispers passed down through generations. It was never explained, only marked as a sign before something great and irreversible. The ticking grew louder. You opened the box. Inside was a single brass minute hand, identical to the one frozen on the clock above, yet warm in your palm as though it had been moving until now. The air shifted. A shadow passed along the wall without a source. Then the great gears of the clock shuddered once, but didn't turn. You set the brass hand back inside the box. The ticking stopped instantly. Somewhere deep in the tower, a door you hadn't seen before creaked open. No light spilled from it, only the faintest draft of cold air, carrying with it the sense that whatever was beyond had been waiting far longer than the clock had stood still. The chamber was nearly empty now. The grand meeting that had drawn leaders from every corner of the globe had dissolved into scattered whispers and hurried exits. The long table at the center still bore the weight of untouched documents, glasses of water half drained, and pens lying where hands had abandoned them. At the far end, A single microphone remained switched on, its small red light glowing steadily. No one stood behind it. The chair reserved for the president sat pushed back slightly, as if he had risen with the intent to speak, but changed his mind in the final instant. You moved closer, your footsteps echoing in the hollow quiet. The air still carried the faint vibration of what should have been said. Pages rustled faintly, though no one touched them. On the surface, before the microphone, was a single sheet, blank except for one small mark in the lower corner. A half-formed symbol, almost like a letter, but incomplete. An aide lingered by the wall, his eyes darting toward you, then away again. He didn't move to stop you when you reached out and touched the page. The paper was warm, as though it had been in someone's hands moments ago. You thought of the way Yeshua had often paused before answering a question, letting silence speak longer than words could. This moment felt the same, the absence of speech becoming heavier than any declaration. The aides began clearing the table, but the microphone remained. Its steady red light seemed to pulse faintly, as though aware of your presence. You leaned toward it, listening. There was no static, no interference, only a deep, steady hum that might have been the sound of the building itself. Then, just at the edge of hearing, a voice began. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't in any language you immediately recognized, yet you understood it. The words were deliberate, each one spaced far apart, as though crossing an immense distance. The final syllable hung in the air for a breath too long, and then the hum returned, erasing it. The light on the microphone went dark. Somewhere behind you, a door shut softly, though no one had been there to close it. You turned toward the sound, but the hall beyond was already empty, as though everyone had left hours before the final word was meant to be spoken.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.